Well, I think for me, the crucial issue is this period after the credit markets collapse. I think it was hard for journalists. I think no one in the financial sector anticipated that the entire residential mortgage market would just freeze up, disappear overnight. This was an unprecedented event in some ways. Financial panics are not unprecedented, but the way that the securities market suddenly disappeared was unprecedented, that we all had feelings of unease, both the regulators and the journalists, and to some extent some of the banks and hedge funds. No one quite anticipated the speed of which an entire $4 trillion market could close. I think the issue was how then to interpret that closure and what to make of it. And here I think that the banks who were secretly panicking had obviously wanted to make sure no one else was panicking. And there was a lot of confusion and concealment. I think ultimately people have to make judgments in this area with limited information. I mean, I think this is always the problem we're having in this area in the time of a crisis. It's not just the financial sector. It's an issue of when you're in the midst of an event as a journalist, whether it's the fall of the Berlin Wall, financial crisis, the deteriorating situation, war, you have to make on-the-spot judgments with imperfect, limited information. So it's a combination of getting little hints, little clues from unexpected sources like a banker's meeting, like visiting things, and a kind of gut feeling, the way Malcolm Gladwell describes it, the sense of having seen some of these panics before, getting a sense that this is the beginning of a panic, and running with that. Because the other thing, the self-reflective nature that you're pointing out, in a way, it's only by asking these questions that you can, in a sense, articulate what's happening more. If you don't ask the questions, you can't get the answers.
Jason, you were talking about that too, the speed that when it happened. What was it like, the panic sitting on the desk when you realized things were going horribly wrong?
Yeah, so, it starts in the morning where, you're sitting on a floor with 1,000 traders and, you see this news story come across the wires. The next thing you know, it's up on CNBC, and all of a sudden the phone starts ringing. And the equity desk was calling because all the hedge funds were calling and going to cash. And all of a sudden, it got worse throughout the day, and for the next couple of days, all the floors were quiet. So you pretty much only had spot transactions occurring, even on the commodity and the currency desks. There was no liquidity, there was no credit, and suddenly we were also under, at one point we were under a blackout, our group, which was an economics group whose job is to forecast, talk to the media, and publish on economic topics. When you're under blackout, our media was calling us up, and what's going on? We're like, we can't comment. We're under blackout. You're what? We've talked to you every day for the last 4 years. You're not allowed to talk today? Nope. So that's a really good sign that something bad is going on. But traders, London, U.S. I had central bankers calling me. Everybody was just really freaked out, and it happened within. The first day was really bad, and then the next couple of days it was just dead, because after all the funds went to cash, and there was just really a clamp on all business. It was quiet for a few days, and then very gradually, after it kind of just went away, everybody was happy to just see this. Like I said before, take this whole event of the credit market. The spreads have been going tighter and tighter. And something investment banks do is they have sort of weekly meetings. And everybody gets together, and they were talking about tighter and tighter and tighter, and all of a sudden the spreads just blew out. But despite this fact, everyone was happy to just put it in a drawer, close the drawer, and just go on with the rest of business as usual.
There's a time when you always advise people never to say the words no comment, but you'd absolutely no choice at that point. Things were that bad. We have plenty of questions here. Christina, just tell people who you're with as well, just in case they don't.
Christina Mdanchek, Business Weekly in Prague. I would like to ask you, we've been talking a lot about what happened in the US, in the UK, and Western Europe. But where would you see Central Eastern Europe in this landscape? Your presentations have been very inspiring, but I address these questions to all of you. Where do you see countries in Central Eastern Europe tied to your presentations? Thank you.
Steve, take that one. Go ahead.
Well, let me say one of the most striking things about this crisis and its aftermath was the way it spread to areas who weren't directly involved in the subprime lending and the residential mortgage-backed securities market. Two of the areas I think are most significant in that are Eastern Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa. I think it soon became clear that the countries of Eastern Europe were going to be very seriously hit because both the currency vulnerability and the capital flows issue. And one of the things you have in a panic is, as Jason said, it begins to spread to everything. So once you believe financial markets are going to contract, all capital flows, private capital flows, went into sharp contraction in the autumn of 2008. And Eastern Europe in particular had been relying for its growth on private investment flows going across the border from Western Europe to Eastern Europe. So it was quite clear that they're going to be very seriously hit by that, and at the same time that their currencies, which nearly all of which were not in the euro, were going to be under big pressure, which could put them in the same position as we heard with Iceland, make it worse. Now, the other thing, what was interesting, I also did a trip to Zambia in January, February 2009, just after this crisis, that even countries whose banking system really was not connected very much to international system was suddenly very much hit because there are linkages. They're exporting to Western Europe. And I went to a flower farm that was sending 1 million roses a year to Europe. And they, as I arrived, they said, we're closing down, we're tearing up all the flowers, we're turning off the greenhouses. The Dutch, where all flower auctions still take place, don't want our flowers. They're going to only pay us below the cost of production. No one's buying flowers. We can't even sell flowers on Valentine's Day. At the same time, their banks, Standard and Chartered, are going to pull the plug, not because there's anything wrong in Zambia, but because everybody's pulling back. So these things, what was amazing about this crisis, and perhaps as I was saying, we didn't report enough, was how rapidly it spread around the world.
Can we have a quick comment, though, from some of the others? We're waiting for you, Danny, don't worry. We do want to wrap this up in about 10 minutes question, and we've got lots of people. So quick comment on the Central Eastern Europe one. Melisande.
Oh, I mean, this is just a general comment. I think one of the things that I've been seeing come up in this conference and now with these questions is that we are quickly skipping to what are the facts of the financial crisis and how are we going to resolve it. I think the issue of how we report on the crisis in Eastern Europe or any other area of the world that's not Western developed societies is a more general question of how those areas of the world, developing countries, non-Western countries, are represented in the media in general. I think it's a question of focus. It's not that the crisis is not hitting in other areas of the world, it's just that in general we don't report on those areas as much. And so I wanted to bring forth this question of focus in the media, focus in this conference. I think a majority of us are of journalistic background rather than financial economic specialists, and it has felt like we spend a lot of the time trying to figure out how we're going to resolve the crisis. That's not the focus. The focus is the media. And same thing for reporting on the crisis in these countries. As Steve mentioned, imperfect information. I think that's crucial to covering anything, but especially a financial crisis in the media. If, as a journalist, we choose to report on something very specific and we report accurately on a few sources on one given aspect of the crisis, it's not going to create too much negative or overly positive impact. It's going to be relatively neutral. If there's a lot of articles and news reports that come out in the media that are trying to explain the entire financial crisis globally and how we're going to solve it from the point of view of a journalist who does not have the appropriate training. So I guess my point is just let's focus in our debates and in our reporting in the media.
Super, and I think the great thing we have here is it's not all journalists. We've got a regulator, we got the economist, we got Danny trying to pull it all together. I'm going to move it on to you, Danny, because we've really got to get these questions in.
I
and
share
do
your
realize
irritation, by the way. You know, I think there's a lot of good grounds for irritation. And one of the issues that we're seeing here, I think, is the limits of journalism itself. How do you get information when the banks won't talk to you, when the regulators are basically giving you a cover story to justify what they're doing, when the legislators, say one thing on Monday and quite another thing on Friday?